Beckmesser was a very important role for you, wasn't it?
It was hugely important and very much a surprise. I remember looking at a score of Meistersinger when I was a young man at Covent Garden, thinking, I understand that there's a very large role in this piece. And I was thinking of, Hans Sachs, obviously, and wondering why it was so large and what it was about the piece. And I'm very bad about going to the opera. Outside of the performances of Meistersinger in which I've sung, I've seen it on 1.5 other occasions. That's shocking, I know, but it is true. So further down the line, having put this score away, Peter Katner, who does a lot of the hiring and firing at Covent Garden and the artistic sculpturing, if you like.
Very good at casting voices.
Brilliant, absolutely brilliant. The sort of quiet genius behind everything there, and has been for many years, said to me, how do you feel about Beckmesser? And I didn't know how I felt about Beckmesser, or I wouldn't have done, if a German colleague of mine in Munich, Alfred, 2 or 3 weeks earlier hadn't said, "Du musst Beckmesser lernen." And he gave me a little yellow book with all the text in it. Not that that was any good, because it's an immense musical role. So 2 people saying this almost simultaneously made me think, well, perhaps I should. And so it began, and we put on this production at Covent Garden that was still perhaps the most memorable evening of my life, and for many others too, I think.
You've decided, interestingly enough, to hear, once again, part of the music without the voices.
There's enormous involvement in the vocal areas of Meistersinger, and it is many hours long. But there comes a point after the, to quote from Peter Grimes, after the hurly-burly of the second act, that we just allow ourselves to calm down a little bit, and the third act opens in a completely different vein, and it's Hans Sachs contemplating everything that he's just witnessed and everything that has happened and the potential danger of it all, and seeking to find some kind of calm in all of that. And there he is in his study, preceded by this amazing music.
There's something about the kind of inevitability of Wagner, isn't there, in that music? The kind of breath in it.
Yes.
The long breaths, and that just make you become hypnotized.
It's incredibly seductive, I think. I think once it entrances you in that way, I think you can't get out of its clutches somehow. I mean, listening to that again, how Kubelik sustains that slow, and he takes a very slow tempo deliberately to see it through. And it's daring, it's very daring to keep it all together, to keep the architecture of that together. And I think that's what Bernard Haitink was so good at, that from the very first moment to the end, 5 or whatever hours later, you had this tremendous span, this bridge of which he understood the architecture and could make that span work.
And also, I was thinking, for people like you, Tom Allen, standing in the wings, not necessarily at that moment, but in moments like that, to hear that sound coming from the orchestra, it must be incredibly inspiring when you're about to go out.
Well, it is.
And be part of it.
It is. I mean, it's happened with Mozart in particular, I think, and with Puccini and with Verdi. But when it comes to this fellow, Richard Wagner, I look at my colleagues that spend their lives there, those that have sung many Wagner roles, and I think they've had extraordinary lives, because it's as though their hearts beat at a different rate. They live at a different rate from the rest of us. They are different kind of people from the rest of us. I think it's not the healthiest area to inhabit for every singer, obviously, because it can take its toll. But this is important to me, this particular piece. How can you call it a piece? We're talking about Meistersinger of Nürnberg. Because it was a very significant time for me at Covent Garden, and I think for everybody else. And the extraordinary thing was that in the way that it developed, quietly with a semicircle of chairs with the Meister sat there day after day, making our various interjections and commentary on what was going on, and making it as real as possible, and discussing all of that, and then it all coming together. The days would go by, the weeks would then go by, and then from that rehearsal room to go to the stage, you knew there was a buzz happening. And I've talked about this in the past, and I'm not deceiving myself. It really did exist. Then there were people wandering around in the theatre thinking, hello, there's something big happening here. And then the first night, or the dress rehearsal in the first night was immensely exciting. It was a huge success. And when we got to the Festvisa at the end of the third act, by the time you make this wonderful procession to the Songfest itself, you looked out into the audience, and the whole of the audience were part of that festival. The first time and only time, I think, I felt being at Covent Garden actually incorporated the whole area. It was all the whole theatre was the arena in which we were performing, not just on the stage. It involved everyone, and that was amazing, an amazing experience.
The prelude to Act 3 of Die Meistersinger von Nürnberg by Wagner. We heard, as Tom Allen said, the Bavarian Radio Symphony Orchestra conducted by Rafael Kubelik. Now, you're a boy of the sea, and I'm not now talking about Billy Budd, although I think, yeah.
No, I was born by the sea and lived by the sea for the first 18 or 19 years of my life, and once that's happened to you, once that's in your blood, it's difficult to get away from it. I think there are mountain people and plains people and desert people. I'm a sea person. I get sick at sea, I have to say, but I just love being close to the sea. It makes me feel better. I remember a doctor saying it's because of the interface. It's the positive and negative ions interfacing with one another, whatever that means, so that I genuinely do feel the benefit of it, and I like to have it in my life, and that's why this piece comes up.
Well, interestingly, you've chosen not Benjamin Britten, but his teacher, Frank Bridge.
Well, in recitals, I often find myself singing Bridge songs, and I introduce them and say, usually, I want to sing now some songs by Frank Bridge, whose other name is Frank Bridge, teacher of Benjamin Britten. I mean, you almost can't get rid of that little addendum on the end. And then the orchestral music, which we need to hear more and more of, I think, and the chamber music too.
This is the second part you've chosen of the scene.
Yes. Yeah. Well, because it's slightly more relaxed. I'm staying away from too hectic a music, it seems, at the moment. This is Moonlight from the Sea by Frank Bridge.
Well, he had the ability to spin a long line there,
absolutely.
Didn't he?
One or two things occur to me. It's that he's not well enough known for us to sit down and say, well, that's clearly Bridge. We don't recognise his voice sufficiently well, I think, and I think that's a great pity. And he's sort of an amalgam of French music that was going on, Impressionism and everything else, but you can hear the English strains as well that are, part and parcel of English music of that period, I think.
But what you can say straight away is that is a very beautiful piece of music by any standards.
It's ravishing.
Yes.
Ravishing. And I'm there on the beach, I can see the moonlight.
Music from the Sea by Frank Bridge, and we heard the Royal Liverpool Philharmonic Orchestra conducted by Charles Groves. So, Tom, now that you've moved into directing a certain amount, do you find it quite fascinating to see from the other side, as it were? I mean, has it informed you in a way?
Oh, hugely, yeah. I mean, it's a big learning process. There's no guarantee, having been a singer for 40 years or whatever, that you learn the other sides of the business. You know, the days that we have off as singers between dress rehearsals and first nights, or, when the day comes to an end at 5:30 or 6 or whatever it might be, all the technical stuff that then goes on that we run away from. It's not our domain, it's the domain of other people. And as a singer, you've finished for the day and you go. But I wouldn't say that I've had to learn all about that, but I've learned a little bit about that. I leave the lighting, obviously, to a man or a woman who knows what that is about. But I love being part of that process. It's a creative process rather than a recreative process. And I think many years ago, that's why I wanted to write a book as well, to be an originator of something rather than just a re-perpetrator of stuff that had gone on before. I mean, I've sort of had discussions about that in the past with various people, but there's a sort of frustration there, I think, that one wasn't producing original work.
We're going to finish, Tom Allen, with the first composer of opera, more or less, and one of the greatest too.
Yes, yeah. Well, it would probably come as a surprise to people. My interest in Monteverdi. I've never actually sung any Monteverdi in this country. That's not a hint or anything of the sort. It's just a fact. But for quite a number of years, I've enjoyed singing the role of Ulysses, in The Return of Ulysses of Monteverdi, in various guises, in various musical interpretations. I saw it first at Glyndebourne. I loved it. There was something quite clearly, intrinsically profound about the piece, and genuine and truthful about the piece, which I liked to watch. I then had the opportunity of singing it first in Salzburg in 1985. And this really is a conglomeration of various things, because it was an opportunity to sing the role. Salzburg decided that they wanted to do this, and of course there were the Arnoncourt, famous versions by Arnoncourt and by Raymond Leppard and at Glyndebourne and various others. And I think powers that be, or someone or other along the line, decided, well, we'd need to take a different view of this and come up with a completely different version of what this music is about. And of course the purists hated it when Hans Werner Henze produced what he did. Those of us involved in it absolutely loved it, because it produced sounds the like of which I think we'd never dealt with before. In the percussion department, or rather in the the kitchen sink department, there was an instrument I think called a lujon, and we had electric guitar.
More familiar to composers like me than the Monteverdi.
They haven't been used terribly often, but there it was, and several others, and electric guitars and mandolins and bouzouki. So the bouzouki was important. We had no higher instrument, I think, than a viola da gamba. Or maybe a viola, I forget. And so consequently what you got was this low, deep music, this deep in intent and deep in its density, really. And it felt pre-Christian. I think that's what I felt about it. That there was no somehow Christian enlightenment in it. It did belong to an earlier age than that, the music that he produced. And I loved doing it. And we did this in Salzburg, and this is the last scene I think we're going to hear.
Well, and it gives us the opportunity, finally, to hear not only your voice speaking, but singing.
Oh, God. It felt as though I was on holiday on a Greek island there for a moment with all the plinkety-plonk and then the accordion music coming in. It's odd to listen to it now. We thought, it was wonderful at the time. I think it still is immensely inventive in making it up. I'd much prefer it in a barer state than that now, and the ones that I'm more accustomed to singing are much barer than that. There was a production we did in Los Angeles that I think the sum total of instruments was 8, maybe, and 3 of those were recorders that barely registered. But nevertheless, this has a grandiosity to it that is very, very interesting, I think.
That was Hans Werner Henze's arrangement of Monteverdi's Il Ritorno d'Ulisse, and my guest, Thomas Allen, was singing Ulysses, Kathleen Kuhlmann, Penelope, with the Vienna Radio Symphony Orchestra, conducted by Jeffrey Tate. Well, Tom, thank you for lending us your voice as both speaker and singer today, and introducing us to these pieces that have a special significance for you.
Thanks very much, Michael. I've really enjoyed it.